Oh, okay.
Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Hare Krishnas in Britain podcast. This is episode 68. A big thank you to everyone who continues to tune in on a regular basis, whether on YouTube or Zoom, sorry, not Zoom, on Facebook, to hear what our guests are saying. Our guests, we're having a few technical issues this week, so we unfortunately can't see our guest's face, but I can assure he is there. But you can see his name very clearly, which is great. So you know who I'm talking to. I'm really pleased to welcome our guest this week, Madan Mohan Prabhu. Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Narayan Prabhu.
And you're all the way in rural Wales, which means we're just having a problem with the internet signal today. Uh, some things I don't know about. So let's just very briefly, if you could tell us a bit about you and where you're from.
Okay, I was born in 1959, so I'm 64 now. That was in Bromley, Masons Hill, southeast London. Um, yeah, I grew up in Bromley till I was 14, moved to Orpington then. Same sort of areas. It's all within the borough of Bromley, sort of southeast London suburbs, northwest Kent. Um, yeah, I struggled through my school years I was ill between junior and senior school, and it hampered my development, and so not a happy time in senior school. And then I stayed on to my A levels, and yeah, my mother died when I was 19. I was just a year out of school, and all of a sudden I was just thrown into like shock. And
Mm, mm,
what happens when someone dies? I'd been raised Baptist, went to Sunday school and all that, but I just couldn't accept this simplistic notion that when someone dies, they either go to heaven because they've been a good Christian, or they go to hell and God punishes them forever because they haven't been a good Christian. It didn't sit well with me, and I didn't believe it. My mum was a lovely person, but not hugely, you know, not a practicing Christian that I saw, but obviously believed in God anyway. So I went on a search, and long story short, my search ended up bringing me to the Hare Krishnas. Um, that was
mm.
1978. My mum died, so I met the devotees 1984, and everything they said made sense. And reincarnation, that you get another chance, to progress, to evolve, towards God on your
Mm.
journey. That made sense to me.
Where and how did you meet the devotees?
Well, I was a motorcycle courier. That's what I did for a living. I did that for 20 years in central London. So I was right in the heart of all the fashion, TV,
Mm, mm,
advertising, you know, all that business. And so I'd regularly cross Oxford Street, and I was making good money back in the 80s. I was making like £500 a week. I was living in a £37 a week bedsit, single man. So, everything seemed great, but uh, every now and then I'd see the Hare Krishnas dancing down Oxford Street. These ecstatically happy looking people. Everyone else is sort of mooching around looking fairly miserable. And there's these people singing and dancing down the street with their arms thrown in the air, making, Hare Krishna, and drumming and bells and all the rest of it. And I just thought, wow, what they look much happier than I feel. So I was intrigued and went and inquired at Soho Street Temple at the end of Oxford Street. And yeah, that began my journey with the Hare Krishnas. And the more I read Srila Prabhupada's books, the more I was convinced that this is a pure devotee who's very close to
mm,
God, a saint. Um, and he clearly knows God, and he wrote something like 80 authoritative books on the subject of pure love of God. Who is God? What are his names, forms, qualities, pastimes, all that. And I was taken. So I joined his mission 1990. I moved into the temple at Leicester. And then I started meeting all of the senior gurus of ISKCON and met some very nice people. I was very impressed by them. But I didn't feel that I wanted to consign my eternal soul into the hands of any of them, just simply because, like me, they had a history, and I didn't accept them any as pure devotees, but very nice. But so I prayed to Srila Prabhupada, please, can I have a guru like you? And that prayer was answered so rapidly, it almost took my breath away. About a week later, three disciples of Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj, this is like 1991, they were his only three initiated disciples in the country. They came and knocked on the door of the temple, told me about Srila Gurudev, and then a couple of months later, there I was out in Mathura, sitting at the lotus feet of a pure devotee who later went on to tour the world, just like Srila Prabhupada had toured the world. He actually revived the Hare Krishna movement. He toured the world 30 times, and he wrote himself 60 books and commentaries on pure love of God, on Krishna consciousness. So there you go. That's my story in a nutshell.
I'm fascinated by this knock on the door. So you were living, somehow you made it to Leicester in 1990. You were living in London. You went to the Soho ISKCON temple. You then went to Leicester in 1990, and for some reason, some followers of Narayan Maharaj knocked on the door. Were they? I mean, what was the context of that? Were they coming to look for you? Were they coming to visit somebody, or
they weren't allowed to play their drum in the block of flats where they lived? It disturbed the neighbours. You can imagine drumming in a apartment complex, it upsets the neighbours. So they wanted to come to the temple where they could play their madanga and chant kirtan. By that time, I'd put on saffron. I didn't really know what it meant, but there I was in saffron. Yeah, right. I just wanted to be part of the boys' club, really. I'd put on my saffron, and I opened the door, and there's these three angelic beings standing there, all dressed in white from head to toe, and two of them happened to be, very attractive young girls, and that kind of took my breath away. I just kind of let them in. So I talked more to the man. This was the tutor Krishna Das, Vishaka Dasi, and Indulekha Dasi. They were Srila Gurudev's first initiated disciples. So a tutor, first thing he said to me is, "What are you wearing that saffron colour for?" I said, "Well, I couldn't really answer him." And he said, "Well, you do realise it means you have to be celibate for the rest of your life." And anyway, so I changed back into white. And I thought, I hadn't realised it was that much of a commitment. And I ended up, I went to Mathura with the two girls to a brahmachari ashram. Yeah, it's not a great start, really, in a brahmachari ashram. You turn up with two pretty young, unattached girls, but there you go. So that's how that happened. Yeah, and that was the answer to my prayer, that's how Srila Prabhupada somehow arranged to connect me with Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj, who turned out to be the closest friend of Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada used to write to him every month in Bengali. And at one point I found Srila Prabhupada's letters in Srila Gurudev's room. So, yeah, that's how that started.
So which year was this, sorry, that you went to India and you met Narayan Maharaj?
1991, late 91. And yeah, as soon as I got there, he was like testing me, and he wouldn't talk to me. and it really put me through it, actually. I mean, actually, the first thing he asked me was, "What do you want?" I said, "Well, I've come to take shelter of you. I'd like, would you please give me initiation?" And he said, "I don't give initiations. Go back to ISKCON." That's what he said to me. And well, I'd already told them at ISKCON that I'm leaving now. I'm going to go and take shelter of Srila Narayan Maharaj. So I'd already burnt my bridges. And I said, well, I don't have faith in any of their gurus. Anyway, so the test began, and I was in his mat for about 6 weeks and sat there, and I'm very, very shy. I was a bit scared of him, really. It's like meeting God, And one day he said to Vishaka, he wouldn't even look at me. He said, "What does he want?" And at that point, I'd become so frustrated. I just blurted out, I want you to give me initiation, please." Gurudev, I called him. And he said, well, I don't know you. Who can speak for you? And then Vishaka, his first disciple really, and senior most disciple still, she said, well, I can speak for him. And, he very sincerely wants to come and take shelter of you. He doesn't have faith in any of the existing ISKCON gurus that he's met. At that time, I didn't know about Srila Bhaktivedanta Maharaj anyway. But so then Gurudev said, well, as soon as she said that, I just broke down. I actually just completely broke down. I was just a mess. I was just crying. This was out in the open. So the brahmacharis are laughing at me. The ladies from Mathura, the local Indian ladies, they're all laughing at me, and I'm just a blubbering mess at my Gurudev. And he looked at me and he said, I see that materialistic men are crying, because they want, material things, but I see that you're crying because you really want Krishna consciousness. So come and see me next to Kadasi, and I'll give you initiation. So that was, January 17th, 1992. Kadasi, he gave me initiation very kindly, Harinam and Gopal Mantra. And that began my relationship with him.
So at that point, 1992, Narayan Maharaj hadn't yet visited the UK, had he?
He hadn't. And what was very extraordinary was that the people in London, I won't mention any names, but said, oh, so you want to go to Super Guru, and so you want to leave the shelter of Srila Prabhupada and go to Super Guru, as they called Narayan Maharaj at that time. And I was like, well, what I really want is just to have shelter of a pure devotee and stay in the shelter of an ISKCON temple. That would have done me fine. But they gave me an either or ultimatum. So I trusted, the word of these three disciples, and it seemed to be, I'm going to go with Narayan Maharaj then. But then, they'd pretty much given me that ultimatum, and then the same people who'd advised me, not to go there, they were coming to visit him. So I was seeing all these senior men, and there was Shivaram Swami, and there was Satsvarup Maharaj, and there was Tamal Krishna, and Kesava Bharati, and all these, there was a dozen of them or so, all coming to hear Srila Gurudev's Hare Katha. And they didn't like us sitting in class. They wanted to be shut in his room with Gurudev, these senior men, with their tape recorders on. But Gurudev had said, this was when he had his room on the middle floor at Keshavji Mat in Mathura. And there's a little side door where Naveen Krishna at the time, he's now Madan Maharaj, would come in, and his servant would come in. So Gurudev said, when I'm giving class, just stand by that side entrance and listen. And so Gurudev would give class, and then we'd kind of stick our heads around the door and listen. And they didn't like it at all. These senior men didn't like it at all. And then Gurudev would stop halfway through his class and he'd say, right, well, what did I say? And he would point to these men with, some of them had thousands of disciples, and they were sitting there like, duh. They weren't really paying attention, or I think maybe they were just depending on their tape recorders. So, and they didn't like that we'd stuck our heads through the door. So then he said to Vishaka, his own disciple, what did I just say? And she repeated it word for word perfectly. So you can imagine it made them somewhat uncomfortable and angry. But a mere young girl was clearly paying attention. A bit embarrassed and this and that. So, but they carried on going to see Gurudev. But at the same time, the GBC directive was, don't go outside ISKCON. Don't go to Srila Narayan Maharaj. Don't go to the Gaudiya Mat. But they were going. So it was do as we say, but not as we do kind of thing. So anyway, that arrangement, everyone came to know about it. And in the end, those men were given an ultimatum. If you want to retain your status within ISKCON as gurus and managers and senior men and all the rest of it, you'll have to stop going to see Narayan Maharaj. So they all just went scuttling back. And some sincere people stayed, and those sincere people, Shamarani Dasi, was Jadurani, Shamarani. Gurudev just gave her that name as a nickname. He didn't reinitiate her, by the way. That was, he just gave her a Braj nickname, and Vrindavan Vilasini, and the senior people stayed with Gurudev. So all that was going on. And every year, I think it was Srila Prabhupada's appearance day, up till then, Srila Gurudev would get invited to Krishna Balaram Mandir, and I went with him, and it was lovely. Gurudev would speak about his memories of Srila Prabhupada. But then after this GBC ban on their own men, they stopped inviting Gurudev to Krishna Balaram and Mandir on Srila Prabhupada's appearance day, and he was very, very hurt. It's like, nobody knows Srila Prabhupada better than his closest friend. And then, not long after that, well, Srila Gurudev, we were hoping and praying that he would travel, and it still seemed a remote possibility. Even as late as January 90, Gurudev's appearance day, early 1996. I was writing to Gurudev, oh, please come, and it was just a vague hope. In May 96, he was in England, and he started his 14-year world tour. So, it wasn't my call. Everybody wanted him to come, and, he came to England, Holland, all over Europe, America, and he carried on doing so for 14 years. So
kind of, I guess I'm trying to understand, get a better picture in my head, kind of pre-1996. Obviously, people knew. What my question, I guess, is pre-1996, people outside of India knew of Narayan Maharaj. Obviously, yourself, you'd heard of him, but he wasn't as well known as in kind of Western circles, or was he? Had word of a guru outside of ISKCON kind of caught on, and his popularity was rising.
I remember very clearly when I was in the ISKCON temple in 1990, that there would be conversations going on, and I didn't understand them, about the Gaudiya Mat, which seemed to be some sort of enemy faction, the way they were talking about them. And I would hear the names, and they weren't respectfully discussed. I would just hear the words Sridhar and Narayan, as if these people were somehow competitors or enemies to Srila Prabhupada. And, the great irony of that is Srila Prabhupada co-founded the Gaudiya Vedanta Samiti, a Gaudiya Mat, in 1943 with Srila Bhaktivedanta Keshav Maharaj, his sannyas guru.
Yep.
When Srila Prabhupada, Srila Gurudev took sannyas in 1952 from Srila Keshav Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada took sannyas in 1959 from Srila Keshav Maharaj. So although Srila Prabhupada was, senior in years, he was born in 1895, I believe. Gurudev appeared 1921. Srila Gurudev, anyway, Srila Gurudev always honoured Srila Prabhupada as his senior. But the point is, there is no philosophical difference between, basically ISKCON was just an outside India expansion of the Gaudiya Mat. It was never meant to be something different. But what I understand from Srila Prabhupada's preaching strategy is he understood the mentality of Americans, especially, very competitive. He also didn't want his disciples, his very neophyte disciples. You've got to remember, these are a ragtag bunch of hippies. He's gathered in America. He didn't want them going to his godbrothers, very senior and exalted disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Didn't want his disciples going to their mats and disturbing them. So, he encouraged a certain separateness, if you like, and he just wanted his disciples just to listen to him, not become confused by listening to other gurus and hearing a different emphasis. But he's basically dealing with rank neophytes, people just like me. I hadn't even heard of Krishna. I grew up Baptist. News to me that Krishna is God. I grew up believing God to be this, vicious old patriarch who'd throw you into hell if you weren't good enough. When he turns out to be an eternally youthful, teenage, beautiful young man who plays a flute, and he has an even more beautiful young girlfriend. I thought, well, that's a much nicer conception of God, but that was alien to me. So Srila Prabhupada came first to establish that Krishna is God, and so all his disciples were neophytes, and like the disciples of Jesus 2,000 years ago, a lot of his disciples didn't really understand why he came, and it's very, very easy to get distracted with the actual purpose of the mission of a great saint. But anyway, he planted all those seeds. He gave absolutely everything in his books, and Srila Gurudev acknowledged that. There's nothing missing in his books. But to understand Srila Prabhupada's books, you actually need the guidance of a self-realized Uttama Vaishnava, a Mahabhagavat Vaishnava, someone who actually has full realization of the contents of Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita. These are not ordinary books. So, yeah, this is...
Do you think there was a fear? I mean, fear might not be the right word, but there was a fear in the kind of ISKCON leadership in the mid-90s that if Narayan Maharaj were to travel, then we're in trouble because at that point, 1995, 96, 17 years since Prabhupada physically left the planet, there was a lot of fall downs, particularly in the 80s, gurus running off with female disciples, male disciples, stealing money, stealing property, and people were becoming so disillusioned with maybe not the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, but the way it's practiced. And so sorry, go ahead.
Srila Prabhupada was recognized as a great saint, even during his manifest pastimes. And as early as 1970, Srila Prabhupada said, "The great sinister movement has entered our movement." So basically, the wrecking crews were sent in. And, anyone can come in and wear Tulsi beads and shave their heads and, make themselves appear like a Hare Krishna devotee, no questions asked. And you don't get asked a lot of questions, do you, when you join at a temple? They give you a new name, you've got a new identity all of a sudden.
If you're on the run from the police, you've got a new identity. You can hide.
Basically, anyone can.
Yeah.
Basically, a great place to hide. You can just leave your previous life behind and go and, from that day on, you're Krishna Das or Krishna Dasi, whatever, for a movement like that, which is recognized, obviously, as a pure movement headed by a pure devotee. Well, what are the great political systems of the world? In a nutshell, you've got godless communism and godless capitalism. They're both just as bad as each other. And they both degenerate into dictatorships. We have this nonsense called democracy, which was summed up by, it's not the people who vote that hold the power, but the people who count the votes. So, we might have control over whose name we tick next to on the ballot paper, but we don't have any control over the people who either count those pieces of paper or tell us what the results are. We just simply have to believe. Oh yes, well, this person is now our leader. So those systems both degenerate into dictatorships, as we've seen. So what Srila Prabhupada came to establish was part of what, the foundation is civilized human society is guided by the wise, is never, never, never ruled by the rich. So at the top of society, you have pure saintly characters who can't be bribed, they can't be bought, and they're advising the administrators on the second tier of society, which includes the monarchy. This is how society should be run. And the third tier of society is the producers, the farmers and the businessmen and the manufacturers. And the fourth tier is the general workers, the Shudras. And Srila Prabhupada pointed out, actually, in this age, because this is a degraded age, we might be technologically advanced, but because this is a degraded age, everyone is born with the mentality of Shudras, just common workers. You can certainly work your way up, but if you want to make spiritual progress, you have to take shelter of a pure saint. But all of society, all of human society should be guided by these great wise sages, these great saints. And Srila Prabhupada said, these law books, these Vedic scriptures that I've translated for you and distributed all over the world, very famously distributed by the Hare Krishnas at airports and streets all over the world. These are law books for human society for the next 10,000 years. So, what Srila Prabhupada did was immense, and it's given meaning and purpose to millions and millions of people. Oh, this is how humans should live, and this is how we can evolve upwards towards the spiritual world. And he showed us the spiritual world. So, what gratitude we have for Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Gurudev, he had to rescue Srila Prabhupada's mission, which after he left had plunged into darkness and chaos, as you mentioned, all these false gurus. So the false gurus and whoever the infiltrators were, and we never quite know who's who, obviously became very afraid that their positions would be threatened because, here's a pure devotee again. And it makes all of them look like, well, at the best third-rate gurus. But in fact, if someone is not on the level of a pure Vaishnava, a fully self-realized soul, they shouldn't be a guru in the first place. So, we know there's been guru issues, but we don't have to dwell on that or worry about it. That's just part of the rough ride of establishing God consciousness in a world dominated by godless communism and godless capitalism. And here we are glorifying our acharyas, and they've done it. But it was definitely a two-phase operation. It wasn't all done because, the mission plunged into darkness in the 80s. But Srila Prabhupada, Srila Gurudev revived the mission in the 90s and, emphasized sadhu sangha, the association of pure devotees, above everything else. Hear Hare Katha from pure devotees. You must have met yourself, Narad Prabhu. You must have met pure devotees. You must have met, well, tell me who you've met and heard their Hare Katha from.
I mean, who have I met? I've met a lot of devotees in my time. I mean, there's certainly some devotees that stand out for me in terms of their purity or the way they present Krishna consciousness. It's very authentic. I mean, I can name drop if you want.
Name a pure devotee that you've heard from.
I often try and if I'm honest, I struggle with this term pure devotee because it can be interpreted in different ways. But in terms of me,
anyway,
I mean, I'm going to name two sannyasis, both in different mats, because I try and be as objective as possible. So one sannyasi I want to name is Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj, who I met 3 years ago, and he had a bit of an impact on me. He probably doesn't know that. So Nemi Maharaj is a sannyas disciple of Narayan Maharaj. I met him 3 years ago at the temple in Birmingham, and I just loved the way he was presenting Krishna consciousness in a very pure and basic way. So him, and also another sannyas disciple, another sannyasi is Janardhan Maharaj. So Janardhan Maharaj is a Diksha and Sannyas disciple of Srila Prabhupada. But in the 80s, he left ISKCON and took shelter of Srila Maharaj. And now, close to 80, he is still traveling the world, following in the footsteps of his gurus. So those are two, and they're probably lesser well known than a lot of the ISKCON gurus.
Well, Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj is very well known to me, I can assure you.
I know. And he also lives in Wales.
Yeah, he's just down the road. He's 15 minutes down the road. Yeah.
There you go. So I mean, I guess I struggle with the term pure devotee, but those two are people that have made an impact on me, and there are probably others as well. If I can, there's I'm not going to name her because she's very embarrassed about ever being any, but there's a Prabhupada disciple yeah, she's been around in my life for about 15 years, and I'm very appreciative of her. And she lives and breathes bhakti. You can tell that by her lifestyle. So she wouldn't want to be labeled a pure devotee, but she's a very important lady.
Okay. So it's the acharyas who carry the mission forward. And acharya meaning an exemplary teacher, one who actually lives the truth that they speak and can inspire others. So yeah, these are great personalities. So we've seen Srila Prabhupada within his movement, Srila Govinda Maharaj, very powerful, acknowledged as a pure devotee. Srila Sridhar Maharaj, I mentioned earlier, Srila Prabhupada said, he's my Shiksha Guru. He was such a prominent disciple of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and his books are just amazing, inspiring. Sri Guru and his grace, and the loving search for the lost servant, the golden volcano of divine love. So many amazing books by Srila Sridhar Maharaj and Bhakti Vigyan Bharati Maharaj, and yeah, so yeah, they tend to be recognised after more and praised more after they've departed this world, to return to Krishna, because there's always controversy around devotees, especially if anyone rises to prominence. But so the controversy that's come up this year that I seem to have embroiled myself in by accident, well, because of my upbringing. I have a very Christian upbringing, although I was formally initiated into the Gaudiya, Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya by Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj. I felt that I wanted to reaffirm my Christian roots. It was very natural to me. They don't baptize you in the Baptist church. They dedicate you at birth and leave you to choose if you want to be baptized. So anyway, I to be baptized. That's the White Spring at Glastonbury, a very marvellous place at the foot of Glastonbury Tor. By a Celtic Orthodox priest, and that's I just felt like I wanted to reaffirm that. And one of the things that attracted me to Krishna consciousness was Srila was very clear: you don't have to give up your religion. You don't have to stop being a Christian, Jew, Muslim, Buddhist, Sikh, Rastafarian, whatever it is that you follow. Just simply chant Hare
We're just having a few connection issues.
Krishna. Take it from there. So I found that really, really attractive. And through those most for me, most.
Can you hear me, Madan Mohan? Can you hear me?
Famous sayings was there is only one religion, that is love and affection.
Can you hear me, Madan Mohan Prabhu?
Can you hear me all right? Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you, but you're
me?
muffling a bit. You're muffling a bit. It's getting better. We lost you for a moment. Can you hear what I'm saying now? Hello? Hello? I'm really impressed we did like 40 minutes without this happening. We had some technical issues before we started recording.
No, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. It's getting...
Oh.
Okay. I can hear you're getting better again. It's getting better. I was once told I can hear you now. You're coming back. You're coming back. Yeah. Just I'm sure in a few seconds it'll be better.
Yeah, my cursor.
Believe it or not, it's the weather. I was once told by a devotee in Canterbury, it's the weather that affects these things, which I never knew. But we're still recording, and I can just about still hear you.
Yeah.
Maybe say something. Okay, Madan Mohan's gone. He was just kind of
Can you
reiterating.
hear me now?
Yes, you're coming back, but it's coming and going. I can pause the recording, I think. Hello, you there? Hare
Yeah.
Krishna?
Do you know what? Believe it.
Oh, you're back. You're back. I said
Hare,
that too. Hare
I am
Krishna?
back. Okay.
Yeah, you're back now. I mean, it was only about a minute or two. Believe it or not, it's the weather that affects these things. I was once told it's the weather. I never knew that.
I'm just thinking to um, let's.
We did about half an hour without any interference. So, um, but we're still recording,
Okay.
and
How far did we get? Where did it get up to?
we were talking about your Baptist upbringing, and you were what you said, which some people might not know, that in the Baptist denomination, children are not christened; they're baptized by adult full immersion. And I think you were about to say that you've been baptized. I think.
Oh yeah. So I got baptized. I chose to be baptized. I chose, because one of the things that Srila Prabhupada said was, you don't have to give up being a Christian or a Jew, Muslim, Hindu, whatever, to chant Hare Krishna, and that attracted me a great deal. And Srila Gurudev famously said, "There is only one religion, that is love and affection." So yeah, I decided to get baptized at Glastonbury White Spring in 2005 by a Celtic Orthodox priest, and it just felt like the right thing to do. So that's probably quite unusual among Hare Krishna devotees, but that just felt right for me. Um, and,
Wow.
and so later on, I mean, just this year, we started having a conversation on Facebook about the parallels between the Essenes of Israel. There were three major Jewish groups in Israel at the time of Jesus. There was the Sadducees, they were the wealthy people. The Pharisees, they were like the temple devotees. They were like fanatical followers of the rules. And the Essenes, who lived away out in the desert, they didn't agree with the Pharisees at all. That actually the Essenes were strict vegetarians. They believed in reincarnation. They wore white. They were celibate in their practice. Basically, they were a lot of parallels with the Vaishnavas of India. And it turns out there was a lot of interaction between the Essenes of Palestine or Israel, if you like it, and India. So they traveled back and forth. And Srila Gurudev confirmed, are you hearing me all right now?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly. I can hear you
Srila Gurudev
perfectly.
confirmed, and this is written in his book, Yoga for Peace. He confirmed that when Jesus was around 15 years old, that he traveled to India and he was trained in Jagannath Puri, and he came to Vrindavan, and basically he was, he gathered all his amazing spiritual knowledge in these so-called missing years. So between sort of the age of 15 and 30, Jesus was in India imbibing, the great Vedic teachings. And then when he came back to Palestine, he astonished everyone because, yeah, this was something different, coming from an Orthodox rabbi, um, that, he was yeah, teaching something different from the Pharisees. The Pharisees didn't like it. They wanted to get rid of him. The Romans, well, they didn't want any disturbance, and yeah, between the Romans and the Orthodox Jews, the Pharisees, they wanted to get rid of him. So anyway, we had this conversation, and then a god sister chimed in, and this floored me actually. She said, actually, Gurudev had mentioned in 1995 in a conversation she had, and she was very much into Mary Magdalene and her relationship with Jesus. She's actually written a book on the subject, one of my god sisters, um, famous book now, Woman in Red, by Krishna Rose. And she said that Gurudev had mentioned actually Jesus has taken birth within our movement. And it's like, oh, okay, well, this is news to me in 2023. I hadn't heard this before. So the conversation just carried on, and then little kind of clues came in, and then yeah, she further said that Gurudev had said actually Jesus wanted to take shelter of Rupa Goswami to attain Manjari Bhav. You know, this is the actual goal of Krishna consciousness as taught by Lord Chaitanya, who incarnated just 500 years ago. So 2,000 years ago, Gurudev acknowledged that Jesus was a pure Vaishnava, but 2,000 years ago, a pure Vaishnava would have had a mood of Vaidhi Bhakti, which is, you know, formal worship in a mood of awe and reverence. So what Lord Chaitanya was making available to the world in his movement was this mood of the maidservants of Srimati Radhika. This was Raganuga Bhakti. So there are two distinct types of sadhana bhakti, two distinct practices. Vaidhi Bhakti, for following the rules and regulations, that will lead you to Vishnu in Vaikuntha, a great attainment. But Raganuga Bhakti, this will take you to the highest level. This will take you to Krishna's home abode. This will take you to Golok Vrindavan. This is where Krishna lives in his home village, and he has a mother and father and close friends and girlfriends, and he takes his cows out. And yeah, this is the goal of Krishna consciousness is in following in the mood of Lord Chaitanya and Rupa Goswami. This is Rupanuga Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So this process has been given how to get to the topmost part of the spiritual world. So why wouldn't Jesus want to get there? Now, something are you still hearing me, Nara?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
So something that Gurudev said to me directly, and I just remembered it just came up in this conversation because it hadn't particularly. I thought, oh yeah, now I remember. Gurudev said in 20 lifetimes from 2,000 years ago that Gurudev would actually enter Krishna's pastimes. He would attain Manjari Bhav. He would actually attain that. So if we accept an average lifetime in Kali Yuga as, or you know, the most 100 years, so 20 lifetimes on, we're in the 20th century. So we have to look around and see, well, who do we know who's attained that? Who's actually arrived at that topmost level? So the guru can be, the spiritual master can be, Srila Prabhupada said this actually this was on the calendar about a week ago. The spiritual master can be Nitya Siddha, an eternally perfected soul who's always been with Krishna. He can be Sadhana Siddha. He can have attained perfection through his own perfected practice in the company of pure devotees, or Kripa Siddha. He can have attained perfection just simply by the mercy of pure devotees. So pure devotees basically are so powerful. They're our only means of entering the spiritual world. It is by their mercy or under their direct guidance that we can enter that world. So, yeah, 20 lifetimes. So we come to the 20th century, 20. Well, who do we know? We know Srila Prabhupada, obviously. We know, yeah, we can list pure devotees, but it's a rare attainment. Undoubtedly, Srila Gurudev himself. So it was a very general thing he said back in 95. Still quite astonishing because it was news to me this year, but Jesus Christ has taken birth within our movement. But then it made perfect sense. Well, why wouldn't he lead all of his followers to the highest part of the spiritual world? Why wouldn't he? And then when you look at the missions of Srila Prabhupada and Srila Gurudev, basically the same mission in two phases. Srila Prabhupada gave the whole of Krishna consciousness, absolutely nothing left out. He gave the whole of Krishna consciousness in his books. What Srila Gurudev did was he emphasized the goal of Krishna consciousness in his books. We couldn't distill that. We couldn't discern that. No conditioned soul could read Srila Prabhupada's books independently and just come to the conclusion, oh, I need to be practicing Raganuga Bhakti if I want to get to the spiritual world. Because that's not a neophyte conception, that's at an advanced stage. So we're talking 3 generations on, really. And Srila Prabhupada said that the children of my devotees' children, they will be pure devotees. So the 3rd generation Obviously, if someone's got the advantage of being born into a devotee family from birth, their consciousness is going to be purified. They're only going to be eating prasadam. They're going to be taught about Krishna. They're going to be chanting Hare Krishna. They're going to go to festivals. They're going to hear Hare Katha from Vaishnavas. They're going to, they're going to be raised in a way that completely purifies their existence. So when they go and then they have children, that you can imagine this is a cumulative effect. So Srila Gurudev was preaching to third generation devotees and, older devotees, in their 60s and 70s now, that have matured in Krishna consciousness. They've been chanting for some of them 30, 40 years now. More than that, I think, Shyamrani Jadharani, she came to Srila Prabhupada 1966. Really, what are we talking, 57 years of constant practice? So Srila Gurudev was talking to a different audience. Anyway.
Can I ask a question? This kind of theological, philosophical position that Narayan Maharaj possibly is the second coming of Jesus Christ. Is that, how widely accepted is that amongst the disciples of Narayan Maharaj?
I have to say, this is my subjective personal opinion, and it will always only ever be a matter of opinion because it cannot be proved. It's not written down anywhere. It may not be generally accepted. The Christians ain't going to like it. And I've only really discussed it with the devotees, just tentatively put it out on Facebook. And the devotees don't like it. They really don't like it because it's new information and it's very difficult. Well, I'd never thought of it before this year. And I've got a very strong sort of Christian background. It never occurred to me. But then, so
I think
let me just say what triggered it. That there were little clues, little things that Gurudev had said. Jesus should be represented as a pure Vaishnava. When he was on parikrama once, the one God sister said he stopped in one place and he just pointed to a certain tree and he said, Jesus sat there and did his bhajan. It's like, well, that's a very extreme. She just remembered being astonished and they carried on, and it's just like a kind of a throwaway line. But what he said, a much more specific thing. And now this is also something not written down, but this is something on the trusted word of someone who heard it. When he was in Alachua in Florida, which is the biggest devotee community in the world, in 2008. Now, this is a couple of years before Srila Gurudev departed this world to return to Krishna. He said, Jesus Christ is here. Jesus Christ reincarnate is here now in Alachua in Florida. So all of a sudden you've gone from 1995, a very broad, somewhere in the Hare Krishna movement, could be anywhere, anyone, any age, any gender, any nationality, no idea. All of a sudden you've got a very specific, focused here, now, Alachua, Florida, 2008. Well, at that point, I just thought about it and I thought about it. I thought, well, there's many possibilities. But I believe I have the capacity to look at this from a Christian point of view. So one theory has been put forward that Jesus did the Messiah thing a couple of thousand years ago, and he doesn't really, he's come back and he just wants to quietly do his bhajan and, doesn't want to raise a profile, because if he said who he was, he'd just have a load of trouble again. And I thought, well, that's one point of view. But from a Christian point of view, the second coming of Christ, and by Gurudev's reckoning, this would be the 20th reincarnation of Christ. The second coming of Christ is the most awaited event in human history. This is huge. So as a Christian, you've been waiting all of your life to hear the news. Now, the church is never going to announce it. The BBC aren't going to announce it. Government aren't going to announce it, are they? Because it's going to upset the apple cart. If Jesus Christ is acknowledged as being back, all they'll want to do is to silence him, attack him, lock him up, get rid of him, kill him. So that person, would not announce his own presence. So anyway, just bearing in mind all of the different potential candidates, looking from a Christian point of view, if, and I'll just say if it was Srila Gurudev, and I heard that as a Christian, that someone is putting forward the idea that Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj was Jesus Christ incarnate, well, like, the first thing I'd want to know, well, who is he? What's he done? Show me his life, and then investigate. So you have 89 years of the life of a pure saint who has been in every way perfect and exemplary in everything that he's done in his life. He certainly fits the bill. Now, I'm not saying you must believe or you ought to believe, but what I am saying is show me a better candidate, and no one has yet come forward with a better candidate for a person who was present in Alachua in Florida in 2008, at the time Srila Gurudev was there. So yeah, I'm basing my conviction on that. Now, it's a logical conclusion, it's a deduction that I've come to, but it makes perfect sense to me. And of course, not everyone likes it. Christians won't like it, devotees won't like it, but you show me a better candidate.
I'm not sure how to follow up on that, but I think one of the issues, one of the difficulties, I'm trying to be objective now. One of the difficulties that some people might have with that argument is that if you look at the last, I don't just mean in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, if you look at the last 130, 40 years, quite a number of people have claimed to be Christ, or their followers have. I was at an event recently, and the Rastafarians were there. And I was with a devotee friend, and she'd never met the Rastafarians before, never heard of them. And one of the first things they said to her was, "Oh, this is Haile Selassie. He was the second coming of Jesus Christ." And it just kind of really threw her. She'd never heard of Haile Selassie. She'd never heard about the theological views around him. And so that's one example, Haile Selassie. And there's been others. So some of them are a bit more fringy, like the Reverend Sung Mayan Moon.
No, I accept that, and but look at their fruits, look at what they've left behind. I mean, also bear in mind, within Gaudiya Vaishnavism specifically, we have this conception of Akhanda Guru Tattva. So Tattva, the eternal truth of the Guru, the spiritual master, is Akhanda. It is indivisible. Krishna says, actually, the Guru is a manifestation of me. They may not be directly him, but they are his pure associates, fully self-realized associates who are non-different from the Lord himself. So now you look at the quality of philosophy presented by Lord Chaitanya, and Srila Bhaktivedanta Maharaj in the introduction to the Jaiva Dharma. He says, if you compare all of the theological conceptions of the world objectively, you must come to the conclusion that what Lord Chaitanya has presented, this is the highest thing. So there are 4 lines of Vaishnava teachings, 4 sampradayas, 4 successions. Lord Chaitanya came and reconciled all 4 of them into Gaudiya Vaishnavism and gave the highest teachings imparted through his disciples, headed by Sripad Rupa Goswami. Now, this is the speciality of the Hare Krishna movement, is sharing this with the world. So there is nothing higher than what has been taught by Rupa Goswami, the 6 Goswamis, the Vaishnavacharyas, brought to the whole world for the first time, 1965 onwards to 77, but directly by Srila Prabhupada. And then his books have exploded all across the world. Then there's all the chaos and everything that always follows when a pure devotee leaves. And then Srila Gurudev came and reconciled everything and taught us, look, this is the specific goal. So this is the very highest thing. And nobody can dispute that what Srila Gurudev and Srila Prabhupada together gave across, a long period of time, between 66 and 2010, what they both gave was all of Krishna consciousness. Gurudev just was able, on the platform of Srila Prabhupada's work before him, he was able to emphasize the specific goal, Rupanuga Gaudiya Vaishnavism, Raganuga Bhakti. There is nothing higher than this, and there is nobody can be compared to these two acharyas. Nobody who's existed in history can be compared. Their teachings can be compared to what these two acharyas have given. So there you have it. So, within Akhanda Guru Tattva, the indivisible truth of Sri Guru, we can accommodate Jesus, Gurudev, and all the great acharyas. We can actually accommodate all of them, even though. And 1936, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, this is when he was still Abhay Charan Dev. Just after Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada had left, he addressed the Bombay Gaudiya Mat, and one of his most famous phrases was, Acharya Dev is not a sectarian concern. And he was saying that the Guru appears in multiple different forms throughout history, but he's one. Sri Guru is one. So this is a Akhanda Guru Tattva. Every aspiring Vaishnava should understand this philosophy. And I hadn't even heard of it, but I've had the good fortune to hear Hare Krishna from Srila Gurudev and his very senior devotee disciples.
Can we share some images? You sent me some images earlier today for sharing. I've got 5 images, like JPEGs.
Oh yeah, go on then.
If you want, you sent me 5. Is there any of those that you sent me? Which one would you like me to show first? I've got to remember how to do it now. There was the one with the logo of the BBC. There's the one with the kind of the geometry landlines. Let's show that one, and you can maybe talk us through it. I'm just going to go to screen share. Where is it? I'm still a bit of a Luddite. Okay, there we go. Right. You should be able to see this. So, yeah, you sent me this image earlier.
Oh, yeah. There you go. Yeah.
Do you want to kind of talk us through it and kind of what it means?
Well, it was about 1990. I was in Conway Hall that's Red Lion Square, that London WC2. Conway Hall just happens to be a hall where Srila Prabhupada spoke in his introduction to Sri Ishopanishad. He was speaking from Conway Hall, and Srila Gurudev himself spoke at Conway Hall. So in this place, anyway, I happened to be there. I think it was some sort of animal rights meeting or something. Anyway, whatever it was about, I picked up this book called Earth Stars, and it had this image on the right. It had this circular image with all the kind of star points across it. I just picked it up and I was fascinated by it, and it's been become my sacred geometry handbook for about the last 30 years, because when you actually look into the science of number, you can actually see that mathematically and geometrically there is coherent evidence of intelligent design, creation, basically. Nothing's happened by accident. This is extraordinary. So these 2 circles you're looking at on the right there, these 2 circles are in the same proportion as the 2 circles of Stonehenge, except they're on a scale of 1,080 times bigger. Now 1,080 just happens to be, not by coincidence, happens to be the radius of the moon in miles. If you look at the inner circle as representing the Earth, 7,920 miles wide, and the outer circle as the Earth plus with the moon's diameter added to it, 2,160 miles, basically the Earth-Moon proportions are represented in those two circles. Now, if you drew a square around the inner circle, touching in four places at Barnet, Hamwell, Croydon and Barking, if you drew a square around that inner circle, the perimeter of that square would equal the circumference of the outer circle. And there you have your most basic temple plan, and this is universal. The square represents the measurable material world, and the circle represents the immeasurable, infinite spiritual world. So squaring the circle is a basic geometric principle that you find in the ground plan of temples worldwide. This is where matter meets spirit. Now, if you look at the star patterns, all those points, this is just when you actually look at the book, there is something like 18 different multiple layered star patterns, 5-pointed, 6-pointed, 8-pointed, 10-pointed, all the way up to 30-pointed. On every point, you'll find a church, a well, a mound. Yeah, some places, because this is something very, very ancient, but there's some sacred significance of every single point. So this is known about, and it's not a coincidence that right in the center of that is actually a church. It was St. Paul's Portland Chapel. That church was built over a spring, the Marion Spring, the water flowing through the planet, and so to be like the bloodstream of the planet. This is what sustains us all. These lines or energy lines, if you like, they can be like they're more subtle. They're like the nerve system of the planet.
We're having a few connection issues again. Just. So we're just having a few connection issues again, but we've done really well, actually. I think Madan Mohan's now left the room. The Zoom room, that is, not the room I'm in here. So I'm just fascinated. Hopefully you can look at that. Madan Mohan sent me some images this morning of different things about geometry, which I have to admit, I really don't understand. I've heard a lot about geometry over the years, and is it ley lines or something? And it's very fascinating how the different numbers and things work together. I knew a woman once who was obsessed with numbers. It was quite difficult, but yes, we're looking at this, and Madan Mohan sent me this morning, this map, because you've got the BBC Broadcasting House in the middle, and the kind of different things and what that indicates. So we're just waiting for Madan Mohan to kind of come back in the room. Let me stop the share a moment. He's not come back. We're just going to wait a few more minutes. It's been great to have Madan Mohan as a guest this week on the Hare Krishnas in Britain podcast, guest number 68. We've got quite a few more exciting guests coming up, including an actor. You might have saw that kind of preview this morning on the Hare Krishnas in Britain social media channels, Hare Krishna Project social media channels. And we're now recording around 2 podcasts a week, sometimes 3, which is fantastic. We're just waiting to see if Madan Mohan comes back in the room. We're recording this on Monday, the 10th of July, and the weather is actually quite bad today, not just in Wales. Here in the southwest of England, it's quite bad as well. There's a bit of a storm outside, and apparently I was once told that the weather does actually affect your internet signal. So we're just waiting to see if Madan Mohan comes back in the room. It's been great to have him as the guest this week. I wasn't aware, actually, he was one of the first initiated disciples of Srila Narayan Maharaj some 30 years ago. That's quite a long time. to be around the Krishna consciousness movement. And I haven't told him yet because I don't want to make him feel old, but the year that he discovered Krishna consciousness was the year I was born, 1984. You mentioned that, and people feel old. So we're just waiting for Madan Mohan to come back in the room for our podcast. Just wait to see if he comes back. Thank you to everyone who continues to tune in on YouTube and on Facebook. We've had so much positive feedback from guests all over the world recently. We've had some really fascinating guests with very interesting stories over the last 10 episodes or so. Now to the extent that we've got a queue of people who are keen to take part in the podcast. We've developed this reputation for being very straight talking, no hidden agenda, to the extent that, you know, we're Krishna conscious. We're trying to be Krishna conscious devotees, but we're also human beings. And we have different questions that we want to ask and different things we want to find out about. We're going to give Madan Mohan a few more seconds or minutes to come back in the room. We'll just wait and see. If not, we're probably going to end the podcast, and I'll put a bit more description in the broadcast, in the caption, as to what we will be talking about. But that's a kind of fascinating proposal or kind of thought process, theological thought process, that Narayan Maharaj may be the second coming of Jesus Christ. The other name I was going to mention, as well as Haile Selassie, the other name I was going to mention is the Reverend Sung Mayang Moon. He's passed away now, but he was the founder of the Unification Church, and his whole ministry was based on himself being the second coming of Christ. So there have been lots of people over the last century that have claimed to be the second coming of Christ, or their followers have claimed them to be the second coming of Christ. I personally haven't heard that about Srila Prabhupada or Srila Narayan Maharaj, but as you know, here on the Hare Krishnas Have Written podcast at the Hare Krishna Project, we try to be as inclusive as possible and for people to share their views. So I think Madan Mohan probably won't be joining us, so I'm probably going to say goodbye to our viewers and listeners at home. It's been great to, I might start talking and then he comes back in. It's been great to have you all on this edition, to welcome you all to this edition of the 68th Hare Krishnas in Britain podcast. Thank you to those of you who have tuned in on YouTube or on Facebook. Please do put a positive comment. Please do share the link with your friends and your family and your contact networks. And please, particularly on Facebook, like, love, or care for it. And if you do want to be a future guest on the Hare Krishnas in Britain podcast, produced by the Hare Krishna Project, do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you. Hare Krishna.